Whether you're chatting with someone in person or remotely, I'm going to share some tips to help you ace the interview. Hi, I'm Alexis, the podcast manager, helping businesses and passionate hobbyists level up their podcast visibility with professional audio and video. So if you want to learn more about all things podcasting, consider subscribing and give this video a thumbs up so we can grow this podcasting community. Okay, let's jump in. First thing to consider, are you doing remote or in-person interview? If you've clicked on this video, then I'm going to assume you already have a podcast. Maybe you've been at it for a while or you just started. Either way, you want to bring a guest to interview. Guest interviews are fun, but the reality is setting them up and dealing with elements that are out of your control can be a real frustration. For example, in-person interviews are great for building a strong rapport and capturing body language. Plus, it's easier to share the energy in the room, but they can be logistically challenging. I currently work with and have worked with clients who record in a studio setting. So maybe they rent it out each month or for specific periods of time to batch record their episodes. And usually if you're renting a recording studio, they'll probably have the nice cameras and the nice mics, but you're responsible for making sure everything is being recorded, being captured, framed properly, things like that. And then there's others who just rent a space with no equipment and they have to provide all of the equipment themselves, which ultimately can be overwhelming if it's not something you're used to, or if you have no interest in learning how to do. Then on the opposite end of in-person interviews, you have remote interviews. I work with clients who run their businesses in a remote setting, which usually means they are doing a lot of at-home recordings. And obviously remote interviews offer a lot of flexibility and you're able to connect with people all around the world. But they might lack the personal touch, or maybe your video and audio quality suffer because it's not something you're prioritizing because you are at home. Maybe you or your guest is using a low quality webcam or the internet connection isn't that strong. At the end of the day, it's all about what suits your style and your goals. Both remote and in-person interviews will take some time to get used to, but you can make it happen. Before you hit record, you gotta do prep beforehand, and that includes researching your guest. Know your guest inside and out. Research their background, their achievements, current projects. What did you want to bring them on the podcast for? What value can they bring to your listeners? Or what was just so special about them that you just had to bring them on the podcast? Knowing the answer to these questions will help you ask insightful questions when you record. But I think a key thing to do before you record is send out every guest a PDF document of everything that they need to do to prepare for the interview. I'm talking using a microphone, recording in a quiet place with less echo. Maybe you even recommend that they record in a room with furniture and carpet to help reduce the reverb. Make sure that they are using strong Wi-Fi. And if you're recording video, make sure that they're video ready. But as a listener too, you want to be able to have them forget that this is an interview that involves technical awareness, if that makes sense. You have to set boundaries beforehand because some guests don't realize all of the prep that goes on behind the scenes before you hit record. Remember, we want a quality podcast. Then as part of your pre-interview prep, you gotta prepare your questions. Create a list of questions to guide you along the conversation, but don't rely on those questions. And include a few open-ended questions. Nothing's worse than asking a question and they're like, yes. We want them to expand on the topic, so if they give you a straightforward yes or no, ask them to elaborate. But be flexible and have that roadmap of questions just in case things get awkward or silent, or maybe the conversation comes to a dead end. If anything too, prep your guest by saying, pretend the camera's not there, because a lot of people feel awkward or uncomfortable as soon as they know they're being recorded, especially when you have video involved. So set the vibe for the room by saying, let's pretend the camera's not there. Anything that ends up happening, maybe you wish you didn't say, or I don't know, maybe they flubbed their words. Just remind them that those things can be edited out in the post-production process. Now let's talk about the art of interviewing. Think of interviewing your guests like a dance. You lead, but you're still dancing along with the same rhythm. This is kind of going back to what I mentioned just a second ago, but depending on the structure of your podcast, you can start with a friendly chat. Ask about their day, their interests. Heck, ask them what they had for breakfast. I don't know, something to make it comfortable Comfortable conversation? Like, how would you want to feel if you were on a podcast and you were nervous as heck? Like I said, many people stiffen up as soon as they know that they're being recorded. So instead of treating this like an interview and being like, hi, good to know you, thanks for being on the podcast, you can say those things, but treat this like a conversation with two friends. You're genuinely trying to learn more about them and you want to share their knowledge and expertise with your audience. So think of it as like you introducing a friend to your other friends. Remember too that natural pauses in a conversation is normal. If they're going to take their sweet time answering something, or maybe they need to think about their answer before they respond and there's this long pause, that's okay. If it really bothers you, you can edit it out later, but just know that long pauses are normal. I will say, one problem I hear with podcasters is they don't let the guest speak. They're constantly interrupting and they just want to chime in right away with whatever it is that they're talking about. I understand that a topic can be very exciting and it's your natural response to want to chime in, but it's important to reel it back a bit. After all, this interview is to highlight your guest, so find the balance between responding and speaking and letting them speak. Like I said, it's a dance and it'll take some practice, but as long as you're aware of it, that's the first step. Remote interviews have their own unique challenges, which is why it's important to test your tech. The microphone, the camera, recording software, your audio interface, everything. Remember, if you're working from home, then more than likely you've unplugged your mic, replugged it in, plugged it out, plugged it out. Taking it off the plug, you know what I mean. It's hard to keep count. So every time before your interview, double check everything. The last thing you want is to do this whole interview and you find out that your microphone was never connected and your audio was picked up by your computer. It's also important to make sure that you have a backup of some sort. If you're using remote recording softwares like Riverside, StreamYard, Zencastr, they usually have a backup recording that is recorded locally to your computer. So like if the internet craps out or something, the interview was still recorded. And remember to create a comfortable environment. Just because you're recording from home and you might think like, oh, it's not really a big deal to worry about my environment or the background, wrong. Make sure everything behind you is clean, organized, especially if you're going to repurpose that video later for YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or TikTok. Now, if you're recording an interview in person, creating the right environment is key to a successful podcast interview. First, you got to choose the right location. You should be in a quiet, comfortable space with minimal background noise. And do what you can to make it feel cozy or fit the vibe that you're going for. Don't choose a room with nothing in it. There's no character. It looks like you just chose the first thing you found. Put some love and attention into the space. Not only will your guests appreciate the effort, but it's gonna look a lot more visually appealing on camera. The second thing that's important when you're recording in-person interviews is mic placement. Position mics correctly so that you capture your audio and your guest audio without any interference. Use an audio interface to ensure that you are capturing crispy sounding audio. And don't forget to remind your guests to speak into the mic for best audio quality. I will say that if you are recording in person, you will have mic bleed, which is when you and your guest are sitting in the same room, but your audio is being captured on your guest's audio. That will happen no matter what you're doing in an in-person setup. But if you have the right editing equipment, the noise gate, or whatever effects that you can use, that will help with that. But that's just a side note. Just remember that not all guests are familiar with the podcast setup, so a little guidance from you can go a long way. And the same as a remote interview, do not, I repeat, do not record without a backup. This can literally save the day if anything goes wrong during your interview. And the third tip for recording an in-person interview is recording levels and quality. Monitor your audio levels during recording to avoid any distortion or overly quiet audio. Oh my gosh, this lighting. We're doing our best here, okay? Do mic checks beforehand and check your audio levels on the audio interface to make sure everything is being captured as it's supposed to. And don't forget to record your audio in a high quality format, like a WAV file. So whether you are going to record remotely or in person, your interviews are bound to be amazing. Just remember these steps that I've mentioned. There will be some mess ups along the way, but it's all part of the process. So keep going and happy podcasting.